There's a number that gets repeated constantly in personal finance content: $1 million. Invest $500 a month. Stay consistent for decades. That million becomes almost inevitable. The math is real. The compounding is real. The outcome is achievable. But here's what I've noticed over decades of analyzing economic systems. Most people who understand the formula never actually follow through. And the ones who do are often surprised by what the number actually means. Today I want to explain why. Not to discourage anyone. Quite the opposite. I want to show you what the simplified version leaves out, so that the people who commit to this goal build a strategy that holds up. Because there's a difference between building $1 million and building $1 million of real purchasing power. Let's start with something that rarely gets discussed. The income number. The median full-time salary in the United States sits at approximately $62,000 per year. That's the worker in the middle. Half earn more, half earn less. But that $62,000 is gross income, before taxes, before Social Security contributions, before Medicare, before state income tax. Depending on where you live, take-home pay on that salary is closer to $46,000 annually. That's a roughly 25% reduction before a single dollar reaches your bank account. When personal finance content tells you to save 10% of $62,000, that's $6,000 per year. When the government takes its share first, 10% of your actual take-home is closer to $4,600. That isn't a minor adjustment. Over 40 years, compounded at 8%, the difference between those two starting points is roughly $230,000. The tax layer isn't optional. It's built into every dollar before the strategy even begins. Now let's talk about the second number most projections quietly skip: inflation. A $1.5 million balance in 2066 is a very different thing than $1.5 million today. Over the last 40 years, inflation in the United States averaged close to 2.8% annually. If that pattern holds over the next 4 decades, your balance would carry the purchasing power of roughly $500,000 in today's terms. That's still meaningful. That's still a significant amount. But it isn't the number most people visualize when they imagine retirement. The goal doesn't disappear. It just requires a recalibration of expectations. The investors who handle this well aren't the ones who earn more. They're the ones who understand the real target, adjusted for real time, and build around it. Here's where the story gets more nuanced. The projected 8% annual return underlies almost every long-term investment illustration. It comes from looking backward at stock market performance over roughly a century. As of the mid-2020s, several major financial institutions have published more conservative forecasts. Goldman Sachs projected returns closer to 3%. Vanguard's outlook was in a similar range. Fidelity's long-horizon projections weren't dramatically different. These aren't predictions I'm making. These are institutions managing trillions of dollars in assets. They're quietly telling their own analysts to plan for lower returns. Lower than the historical average suggests. At 3% instead of 8%, a 40-year timeline produces a very different result. Not a catastrophic one, but a substantially different one. The honest answer is that no one knows exactly what the next 4 decades will deliver. What we do know is that building a plan around only the most optimistic historical case creates fragility. The investors I've observed who navigate this well don't chase the highest projected return. They build strategies that function across a range of realistic outcomes. Now, there's a third concept that almost never gets explained in accessible terms. It's called sequence of returns risk, and it's one of the most consequential ideas in long-term investing. Here's the core of it. Two investors can have the exact same average return over 30 years and end up with dramatically different balances. Why? Because the order in which the returns arrive matters enormously. If your portfolio suffers a major decline in the first 5 years of retirement, the damage is far more severe. More severe than if that same decline had happened in year 25 while you were still contributing. The math of declining balances early, combined with regular withdrawals, creates a compounding drag. A later recovery cannot fully undo it. The people who retire in 2009 after a 2008 collapse face a completely different challenge. Different from those who retire in 2013 after the recovery. Same strategy, same discipline, different decade of exit. Very different outcomes. This isn't a reason to avoid the long-term approach. It's a reason to understand that the exit phase deserves as much attention as the accumulation phase. Most personal finance content ends the story at the million-dollar balance. The harder conversation is what happens to that balance over the following 25 years. Let me shift to something more encouraging, because the core message of patient, consistent, long-term investing is correct. It's just incomplete without these layers. Here's what I've consistently observed among people who achieve meaningful financial security on ordinary incomes. First, they understand that savings rate matters more than return rate in the early years. The variable they control, how much they set aside, has more impact in the first 15 years than the market return does. The return becomes dominant later. But in the early phase, behavior outperforms prediction. Second, they treat tax-advantaged accounts as structural tools, not optional perks. A Roth IRA allows contributions to grow and withdraw tax-free in retirement. That tax elimination on decades of compounded gains is worth far more than most people calculate casually. In Canada, the tax-free savings account operates on a similar principle. The RRSP defers taxes to withdrawal. Understanding which structure benefits your specific situation adds meaningful real purchasing power to the end result. Third, they resist the version of lifestyle inflation that feels like progress. This is the one I find most psychologically interesting. Lifestyle upgrades rarely feel reckless when they happen. They feel like earned rewards, a better apartment after a raise, a newer car after a promotion. Each decision seems reasonable in isolation. The aggregate effect is that the savings rate never improves despite rising income. The people who build genuine long-term wealth tend to have a quiet rule. Every time income rises, the first allocation goes toward the investment rate. Not the lifestyle, not all of it, but enough that the gap between what they earn and what they spend grows over time. Fourth, they stay invested during market stress. I want to be careful here, because I've seen both extremes cause real damage. Panic selling during downturns locks in losses. More critically, it removes capital from the market during the recovery phase. The data on this is consistent and clear. Missing a small number of the best-performing trading days dramatically reduces long-term returns. Those best days tend to cluster near the worst periods. But I've also observed the other failure mode. The person who stays invested in a strategy that was never appropriate for their actual risk tolerance or their actual timeline, holding through a decline that permanently impairs their plan. Staying invested is the right instinct. Staying invested in the right instrument for your specific situation is the complete answer. Now, a word about fees, because this is one of the few variables in long-term investing that is almost entirely within your control. The difference between a fund charging 0.05% annually and one charging 1% sounds small. It isn't. On a six-figure portfolio over 20 years, that difference compounds into tens of thousands of dollars. On a portfolio approaching $1 million over 40 years, the gap represents years of additional contributions. The low-cost, broad-based index fund isn't glamorous. It doesn't tell a compelling story. But the compounding math on keeping fees minimal is one of the most durable advantages available to ordinary investors. Let me close with the thing I most want you to take from this. The $1 million goal is achievable. On a median salary, with discipline, with time, with the right structure, it is genuinely achievable. But the real target isn't $1 million. The real target is $1 million of durable purchasing power, structured to survive inflation, structured to survive sequence risk, structured to survive the decades when markets disappoint expectations. That's a slightly harder goal, but it's also the only goal worth building toward. The people who get there aren't the ones who found a secret. They're the ones who understood what the math assumed and planned for what it didn't.